Galatians 3:28. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Galatians chapter 3, verses 28. The source of your identity is the source of your division. Here we have the early stages of potentially another devastating war as a combat veteran 2 times through Iraq. I definitely know the pain and the sacrifice required mentally, emotionally, and spiritually in times of war. Fair to say all wars are a product of divided identity. Each person rooting themselves in conditions, belief systems, value systems that are opposed to others. War is very much a child of a disturbed identity. And biblically, we are called to unite and unify ourselves as one in Christ Jesus. However, mankind having free will, it's popular to kind of go your own way, do things on your own terms. And here we are. I want to talk a little bit about how the US government, through a lot of its extremist, controversial strategies, plays a large part in the radicalization of its citizens. Division in US society isn't just based off of race alone. A large portion of it is political. Says here the psychological climate of a nation is rarely separate from the behavior of its government. When political institutions operate through intense ideological conflict, fear narratives, or wartime rhetoric, those patterns often filter into the consciousness of ordinary citizens. All right. In the United States, growing political polarization has begun to reshape how individuals interpret reality, loyalty, and moral responsibility. As soon as I'm talking, we have the trash. Of course, the damn trash man is coming with this loud ass truck. In the United States, growing political polarization has begun to reshape how individuals interpret reality, loyalty, and moral responsibility. Surveys show that 85% of Americans believe politically motivated violence is increasing, reflecting widespread concern that political conflict is no longer confined to debates, but is spilling into everyday life. Researchers warn that extreme polarization can lead people to dehumanize political opponents and adopt moral certainty about their own group, conditions historically associated with rising aggression and political violence. From a psychological perspective, this represents a form of collective identity fusion, where personal identity becomes inseparable from political allegiance, making ideological disagreement feel like a personal attack. I'm not in the business of debating any white identity extremists at all right now. Period. I'm not debating you in general. I'll just block you. And that's any identity extremist, but specifically white, because you guys are very much married to the United States government and its policy, even if it could be morally corrupt. I'm looking in Instagram comments, not that Instagram is the measure of morality, but a lot of these social media platforms do expose hidden sort of motivations and thoughts that people don't feel safe exposing in public. And you can see a lot of just sort of like people rationalizing behaviors, incidents, you know, for the example, of course, in war, you got to expect you're going to have a loss, you're going to have casualties. What, how those casualties look, it's sort of like you don't really have a choice in the matter, right? You're going to lose lives, okay? However, the narratives that spin around these victims, right? And when children's lives are lost, it puts a lot of the American public and the public in general in a really tight spot, which unfortunately, regardless of whatever war we in, it's not like the government is sitting debating like, hey, should we do this for the kids? They could really care less. But that filters down and it trickles down to the American public where people who may have strong moralities or values or virtues around certain beliefs regarding children, regarding humanity, might find themselves challenging these beliefs and even diminishing the values of these beliefs in service of their patriotism. Okay. So, recent events illustrate how political identity can manifest in disturbing ways. The 2025 assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk during a speaking event shocked the nation and was described by analysts as part of a broader wave of politically motivated violence. Other incidents, including shootings of lawmakers and threats against political figures across the ideological spectrum, show how partisan hostility can escalate into real world harm. Psychologists note that when group norms within political movements shift towards hostility, those norms can override traditional social boundaries that discourage violence. A lot of times, the United States like to pride itself on pointing at everybody else as being extremists. Those extremists, those radicals, these Iranians, these America is now becoming a country of radicals, of extremists. All right. Look at all of the support. Even if Donald Trump can be as wrong as the day is light, nobody's perfect. Just because you're president doesn't necessarily mean you are everything you do is righteous, right? It's not debatable, right? No, you can be as wrong as the day is light. Okay. And just because you hold these titles, you'll have some people that just like, no, this is what we're supposed to do. No, this is right. This is so that, it becomes a very dangerous thing, politics, even more so than even race, I would like to say in some instances, depending on everything is, could be up for debate. But a lot of the politics and the government's strategies and policies and approaches, and even the coded rhetoric, right, that I talked about, can very much create chaos and destruction among its citizens, just as much as racism. So, says here, again, other incidents, including shootings of lawmakers and threats against political figures across the ideological spectrum, show how partisan hostility can escalate into real world harm. Psychologists note that when group norms within political movements shift towards hostility, those norms can override traditional social boundaries that discourage violence. In this environment, individuals who already struggle with impulse control, paranoia, or aggressive tendencies may begin to rationalize harmful behavior through political ideology, transforming personal grievances into moral crusades. From a deeper psychological lens, this dynamic can create what some scholars call civil psychopathology, a pattern where societal institutions reinforce extreme thinking that gradually shapes the behavior of its citizens. When national identity is tied to unwavering loyalty to political power, dissent can be perceived as betrayal, and empathy for opposing groups diminishes. The result is a culture where distrust, anger, and ideological absolutism become normalized. Studies show that even a minority of citizens expressing support for political violence can create a climate of fear and instability, with surveys suggesting that between 8% and 40% of Americans have at times expressed support for politically motivated violence under certain circumstances. In such environments, individuals may mirror the psychological posture of their leaders, embracing extreme patriotism, demonizing opponents, and viewing conflict through a lens of moral warfare. Over time, this feedback loop, okay, between government rhetoric and citizen behavior can reinforce cycles of polarization, producing a society where the emotional tone of politics increasingly shapes how neighbors, families, and communities treat one another. But you guys know this. Some things in America I feel like become so normalized, even though it can be just as damaging and rottening to the soul. We eat that. Right? Yeah, whatever, man. We just deal with that, right? Yeah, good luck with that. So let's look here. 7 ways government extremism psychologically echoes throughout society. One, identity fusion between citizens and political power. All right. When national identity becomes inseparable from political loyalty, citizens may feel that defending the government is equivalent to defending themselves. This psychological fusion makes disagreement feel like betrayal rather than dialogue. Studies show that individuals who strongly fuse identity with political groups are more willing to justify aggression toward perceived opponents, like that Marine who stood up and was, going to speak against the Senate, right? Who essentially voted that, hey, Trump actually has a right to continue bombing Iran. Let him do what he does, right? We'll worry about the consequences later, right? And you had that Marine who was fighting, right? That freedom of speech and who was opposing, right? Just opposing his beliefs, right? Broke the man arm, right? You can lose your arm trying to oppose the radicalization of the United States that we're witnessing, okay? Two, wartime narratives normalize aggression. It's so funny because we used to always look at the Chinese like the Chinese, those communists. Oh, they're a dictator. Oh, you're in a dictatorship right now. Look at Donald Trump, right? Look what white identity extremism has created, white folks. You got to really look in the mirror right now. God gonna bend your arm. I'm telling you, you ain't got to listen to me. I could care less, but God is going to bend your arm, okay, one way or another, for you to look at the consequences of the social engineering that a lot of you have had a hand in, and look what it creates, right? Look what it creates. You can't tell these white identity extremists nothing, and don't let them get into a position of power where they're protected, right? People can lose their lives just opposing them. You're done, right? Millions have to suffer because of our social engineering in this country. Even if we oppose, right? Eventually, people are going to be afraid to even oppose. People are just going to get along to go along, and that creates resentment, that creates bitterness. Now you got to worry about who's going to betray you. All right. Are you really aligned or not? All right. If we kill honesty, you just create an atmosphere where people become passive and they keep a lot of the radical beliefs that they truly have underneath, and they wait for an opportunity to expose it rather than just letting people show themselves authentically. If you're like, no, you can't have this opinion, we'll break your fucking arm. No, you can't think like this. You can't think like that. People harbor that resentment and they wait for an opportunity to release it through violence. Okay. It's not a healthy recipe. Wartime narratives normalize aggression. Governments often use emotionally charged rhetoric during war to mobilize citizens and unify the nation. While this can increase solidarity, it also trains populations to interpret conflict through moral absolutes. Over time, this mindset can spill into domestic relationships where disagreement is treated as moral combat rather than a discussion. Political leaders model emotional behavior. Citizens often mirror the communication style of their leadership. When political discourse is dominated by insults, fear based messaging, and accusations, those patterns gradually appear in public conversations. All right. Social media research shows that hostile political rhetoric from leaders correlates with spikes in online harassment and public hostility. Right. Monkey see, monkey do. Polarization creates psychological tribalism. Political identity can become a primary social identity, dividing society into tribes that distrust each other. When group identity dominates personal identity, empathy toward opposing groups declines. Psychological tribalism increases suspicion between neighbors, coworkers, and even family members. Extremism activates vulnerable individuals. Individuals already struggling with paranoia, aggression, or unstable identity structures may interpret political messaging as validation of their fears. In rare cases, these individuals act violently while believing they are defending their group or ideology. Okay, political radicalization research shows that extreme narratives often provide justification frameworks for personal grievances. Couple more. Moral absolutism replaces nuanced thinking. In polarized environments, complex social problems are reduced to simple moral narratives of heroes and villains, right? This cognitive simplification resembles black and white thinking commonly studied in psychology. When entire populations adopt this thinking style, compromise becomes psychologically difficult. Cycles of hostility reinforce themselves. When citizens internalize the emotional tone of political conflict, they reproduce it in daily interactions. Families argue more intensely about politics, right? You had that white identity extremist killed his daughter just over a debate around Donald Trump, murdered his daughter over Donald Trump. We've come to a place in America where the fathers are willing to kill their children all over an argument over Donald Trump. White identity extremism. I'm going to keep hammering it in because you guys are afraid. You're scared to speak out against white identity extremism. You're scared about losing your job. You're scared about people looking at you a certain way. If you're living in fear in this country, I don't live in fear. I've suffered so many consequences for speaking my truth and standing in my truth, and I'm gonna keep doing it. It isn't to be an asshole, but this has to be discussed. Okay, everybody doesn't have to agree. All right, and diminish their value system so you guys can sleep at night. So important to stand in your value system. You might take some losses, right? It's okay. So when citizens internalize the emotional tone of political conflict, they reproduce it in their daily interactions. Families argue more intensely about politics. I can only imagine the arguments right now at the dinner tables with everything that's going on. And some family members are probably just like, I'm not even going to debate you. Yep, you're right. Yep, okay, all right. Yep, I got it. Right. And they leave the house and they're like, man, fucking dad, fucking mom, idiots. Right. They complain to their therapist. Therapists are are on top more than ever right now. I can only imagine all the stuff they're picking up. So it says here, communities fragment along ideological lines and distrust towards institution grows. Society begins reflecting the same emotional volatility that exists within its political system, perpetuating cycles of collective psychological stress, right? And then you all get drafted. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's almost like America's feeding on itself, praying for you guys, praying for your safety. Just some information. Take it how you want it, right? Just planting seeds. Hope you guys have a blessed day. Be safe.